Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I thank CAPS for giving me this opportunity to be present here and to articulate my thoughts on behalf of the Indian Air Force. And what I'm going to talk about is India's vision for utilization of the space domain. First quote by General John Hyten, who commanded the US Space Forces, and he says that our war fighters depend on space. They depend on the asymmetrical advantage it creates, and there is no going back, unquote. I think this is most aptly put. And so therefore, I'll follow it up with another quote. Asymmetry is essential to act as a deterrent. Development of space-based assets and possessing credible space-based war fighting capability to disrupt the enemy takes us there. Actually, it is my quote, but since I'm a little junior in service, I have made it as anonymous. Maybe some years later, it will be quoted as my quote. How do I intend to navigate through this talk? We'll look at this IF space vision, IF and the space domain, briefly touching upon SATCOM, PNT, ISR, SATMET, SOL. Then I'll quickly summarize by saying what are our present capabilities. Look at the way ahead, which should be the crux of what I'm going to speak, and thereafter conclude to see what we have in the future. Well, we are all aware that the Sputnik crisis in 1957 started the space race. That was the first time when the Russians put the Sputnik in space. It jolted the US out of its slumber, though they had something ready with them, but it had not been brought out in the public domain. Well, as an aside, it also started the beginning of NATO. So 1957 Sputnik crisis not only started the space race, but also got creation of NATO into action. Since then, space was used militarily to demonstrate ballistic missile technology and also as op location for military SATCOM, ISR and PNT satellites. So what does IF look at when we talk about space? Briefly, it intends to fully integrate air and space capabilities to have a seamless continuum in the aerospace domain, reduce sensor to shooter time, which is extremely important for any military operation, enable successful time critical operations, and ensure resilient and persistent presence. We cannot forecast when the combat or battle is to take place, and therefore we have to be continuously be ready with updated information so that we are able to launch at short notice. Coming to IF and the space domain, our op role is closely linked with space operations. It is extremely difficult to differentiate between air and space. When we operate in air, we are very closely operating in space. When we are operating in space, we are very close to the air. So therefore, Air Force operations are one single continuum where we move from one to another in a seamless manner. The IF space resources utilization is for the following: satellite communication, positioning, navigation and timing, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, satellite meteorology, and safety of life operations. Let's have a look at it one by one. The Indian Air Force started using the space domain when it started the beyond line of sight communications in the 1990s. In the 2000s, we had set up a dedicated SATCOM network, which is also called the Air Force Net. In the last decade, airborne sensors like AVACS and AWNC started exploiting the space assets. We have dedicated space satellite, that is GSAT 7A, which is operational since 2019 for communication and RPM missions. The RPM missions will, of course, become operational when we have the new satellites, RPS coming in, and they will be able to use available bandwidth of this satellite. AON has been accorded by the DAC in December 21 for another satellite for enabling beyond line of sight communication for airborne elements through SDR. Coming to positioning, navigation, and timing, we are using the GPS and the GLONASS based PNT. And the NAVIC restricted services are being implemented. The handsets or the chips for that are being developed by DRDO. And we are very hopeful that in the near future, they will be made available so that we can use these handsets and the relevant equipment in static as well as in mobile platforms. Coming to ISR, essentially of two types, that is IMINT and ELINT. As far as IMINT is concerned, the satellite-based imagery for air operations and situational awareness of adversary installations is a very important activity that we are engaged in. As far as ELINT, exploiting services provided by Kautilya, which is a technology demonstrator by DRDO, is something which has proved to be very, very useful for us. We hope that this will be taken forward and we should soon see something more coming out of this. As far as SATMET is concerned, space-based weather data from open source is being used for near real-time weather dissemination to users. We are generally aware of the ground-based sensors that give us information about the Met. However, with space-based sensors, we get, in addition to the ground-based sensors, a third dimension which gives us good input and comes in handy for air operations, especially to do with satellite launches and other things. Safety of life, this is an important activity. We utilize satellite-based distress alert system for airborne platforms under COSPAS SARSAT program. The COSPAS, just for those who are not fully aware, it is a 45-country treaty-based organization which provides support for search and rescue using the satellites. So, with whatever I have said, what does the Air Force utilize the space for? So, what are our present capabilities? So, we look at dedicated and dual-use satellites used by armed forces in communication and ISR domains. GSAT-7A is a dedicated satellite. However, GSAT-8 and 18, both KU band, and GSAT-17 are dual-use satellites. That means they are also used for commercial operations, and we also have some stake in its operation. All our communication satellites are geosynchronous orbit. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantages being that it is at a constant space and it provides us continuous information. The disadvantage saliently is that its position is known and therefore it may be utilized and targeted by the adversary. For the NAVIC services, realization of NAVIC receivers, that is the restricted service on IF platforms, is in progress. The handheld sets have already about to be given to us for trials to all the three services, in fact. And we are in the process of obtaining information from the OEMs for integrating these in the mobile platforms as well. IF is the lead agency for launch of NAVIC satellites, 4 main and 1 standby, to meet the specific requirements of the armed forces. So therefore, with these capabilities, what is the way ahead? First and foremost, small satellite constellation in low Earth orbit for ISR and SATCOM, with advanced security, of course, with adequate redundancy and restitution. There are two schools of thought. One school says that we should have satellites which have a long life once it is launched, since the cost is high. The problem with that is it becomes redundant after some time. Capability upgradation becomes difficult. If you have small satellites, they can easily be changed. Their lifespan is small. However, they are more in number which are required since their coverage is less. Also, since they need to be constantly be maneuvered, so their fuel consumption is high. So both have pluses and minuses. The advantage of small satellite constellation in LEO is that they can easily be launched and easy to maneuver, give us better coverage and therefore better accuracy. Integration of aerospace assets in network-centric environment. We are all familiar where we need to go forward in RPA utilization, AVACS, AWC, Helitele, P-Force, AFNet, DMRR, that is digital mobile relay, MCT, mobile communication terminals, MSST, that is mobile secure satellite terminals, etc. These provide tremendous amount of flexibility of use and therefore the communication increase by a phenomenal degree. All sensors and shooters should be equipped with multi-GNSS PNT solutions for enhanced redundancy. So in case one fails, the other is available. With NAVIC RS code as primary GNSS signal for navigation and targeting. We traditionally have been using the GPS. However, we know the agency operating it. We also have, in most of the cases, the GLONASS as the backup. Now with NAVIC coming up, in case both GPS and GLONASS are not available. We still have redundancy in addition to the inertial navigation system that we have on board. And of course, when we talk about ISR and space situational awareness, the quantum of data being so large, we need artificial intelligence to handle that data and come out with intelligent information which can be used effectively. We need comprehensive space surveillance network for seamless coverage. Now it is not too difficult to understand that it is an extremely costly and time-consuming activity. If one country has to do it, it will take tremendous amount of time, energy, effort. And of course, not to talk about the money part. So therefore, cooperation with other friendly foreign countries who are like-minded in this thought will be a tremendous boon for us. We need to also look at the QRMs, such as launch on demand and air launch satellites. A lot of progress has been done in certain advanced countries in both these domains. And we're also looking at, while air launch satellites may take some time, launch on demand should something which should be possible, particularly in light of what General Shukla said about the private startups. Customized training on space-related operations and participation in international exercises with friendly foreign countries, another area where we are actively looking at. While it is not to say that our knowledge domain is or knowledge level is less, but when we interact with others who are doing equal or more than us, there is always a good idea to exchange best practices and get a little more what we can adopt to our requirements. Defensive and offensive capabilities is something which we actively need to progress with. Defense of our own space satellites by ruggedizing them, by making use of electronic measures, and of course, by having the offensive capability, ASAT, both kinetic as well as non-kinetic. All of you will remember the test carried out where we carried out a kinetic kill on one of the disused satellites. We need to move further and enhance that capability much more. And of course, ground stations in the friendly foreign countries for enhanced speed of data availability. It is okay with what we are doing with the geostationary satellites, but when we talk about the ISR part, when the satellite finishes its run over the country and it goes past, we need to have some Earth station which will receive that data because downloading of data is mostly in the line of sight region. So if we have ground stations in other countries, it can be downloaded there and the data will be available to us before a second pass takes place on the same location which we want or the target location which we want. So having said what we have in future, what we are looking at, in conclusion, I would only like to say that the space domain provides us with numerous opportunities. With the private sector also coming in, I'm sure the pace at which things are happening will only increase. There is active cooperation with ISRO, which we cannot openly say for want, since that may lead to sanctions and have some disturbance in the process that is happening. But there is good cooperation which is happening. There is cooperation happening with DRDO. Yes, there are issues with timelines, but we are helping and giving all the help that they need. There is a need to explore and exploit the potential available in the armed forces, industry, academic, and research institutions. And a holistic and unified approach will ensure synergy and optimization of resources. And that's all I have to say. I once again thank CAS for giving me this opportunity to present here and speak to all of you. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Marshal Ranade.